Ryan had always considered himself just another university student, ordinary, quiet, and somewhat of a loner. His days were filled with lectures and study sessions, with little excitement or adventure. He liked it that way. Life was simple, and he was content. But all of that changed on a seemingly normal evening. As the sun began to set, and the sky shifted into shades of purple and orange, Ryan decided to take a different route home through the park. He had walked this path hundreds of times, but tonight felt different. There was an odd stillness in the air, as if the world was holding its breath. As he strolled along the winding path, Ryan heard a rustling sound coming from the dense trees at the edge of the park. His first instinct was to ignore it, but something made him pause. It was too quiet. He couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was out there. He took a few steps toward the source of the noise, his heart beating a little faster. As he pushed past the bushes, he was taken aback by what he saw. Lying motionless on the ground was a figure, an unconscious woman. She was unlike anyone Ryan had ever seen before. Her skin had a faint, glowing hue, as though it were gently illuminated by some invisible light. Her long hair shimmered silver, cascading in waves around her shoulders, and her clothes were unlike anything from Earth. A soft, iridescent fabric clung to her form, glowing softly in the dim light of the evening. Ryan knelt beside her, unsure what to do. Her breathing was faint, but she was alive. He quickly checked for injuries, relieved to find none that were immediately life-threatening, though her delicate features were pale. She looked as though she'd been in a struggle. Panic began to set in as he realized how much danger she might be in. He needed to get help, but the park was far from the main road, and he didn't know if she would survive the wait. Ryan made a quick decision. Without thinking twice, he carefully lifted the unconscious woman into his arms. She was surprisingly light, though her delicate features and strange appearance made him nervous. His mind raced as he ran through possible scenarios, but he couldn't help wondering who she was and where she had come from. His first thought was that she must have been a victim of some kind of accident, but then why didn't anyone else seem to know she was there? He took a deep breath and began moving toward the exit of the park. The stillness that had felt so calming before now felt eerie. As he reached the park's entrance, he noticed something strange, a flicker in the air, like a distortion. It was barely noticeable, but enough for Ryan to stop in his tracks. His heart skipped a beat as he realized that he was no longer just carrying a stranger. He was part of something bigger than he had ever imagined. With a final glance over his shoulder, Ryan continued walking, unaware that this small act of kindness would forever change his life. The mysterious woman in his arms wasn't just another person in need of help. She was about to turn his world upside down. Ryan carefully carried the unconscious woman into his small apartment, the door creaking open as he stepped inside. His heart was still racing, and he couldn't shake the strange feeling that had settled over him since he first laid eyes on her. He gently placed her on his couch, trying to be as careful as possible, though he had no idea what he was supposed to do next. The woman's appearance was baffling, her glowing skin and strange attire making her seem almost ethereal. Ryan had never seen anything like it. He quickly grabbed a damp towel, dabbing her forehead as he waited for any sign that she might wake up. The room felt too quiet, the only sound being the soft hum of his refrigerator and his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. After what felt like an eternity, the woman's eyes fluttered open. They were an intense shade of violet, bright and captivating, and for a brief moment, Ryan was lost in them. She blinked a few times, clearly disoriented, her gaze darting around the unfamiliar surroundings. Ryan took a step back, not wanting to startle her, though his anxiety only increased with her every move. He wasn't sure what to expect from her. Was she from another country? Another planet? His mind ran wild with possibilities. She finally spoke, her voice soft, but with an underlying strength. "Where am I?" she asked, her accent thick and unfamiliar. Ryan felt a chill run through him, the oddness of her voice adding to the sense of strangeness that surrounded her. "You're "You're safe," Ryan stammered, unsure how to explain what was happening. "You were unconscious in the park. I found you and brought you here." He could see that she was trying to make sense of her surroundings, her eyes flicking between him and the room. It was clear that she wasn't from around here, but how could he ask the questions that were racing through his mind without sounding completely insane? The woman sat up slowly, her movements graceful yet cautious. "I remember running," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I was being chased." Her eyes locked onto Ryan's with an intensity that made him uneasy. "You saved me." Ryan nodded, though his head was spinning. I couldn't leave you there. Who were you running from?" She hesitated for a moment, as though considering how much to reveal. Then she spoke again, this time more quietly. "They're called the Xilarians. They are enemies of my people." She seemed to struggle for the right words, her gaze distant as she searched for the proper explanation. "I am Princess Celine of the planet Therion. I was sent here to escape them, but they're still after me." Ryan's mind raced. This was no ordinary woman. Princess? Alien? He opened his mouth to ask more questions, but he couldn't find the words. It was too much to process. Princess Celine noticed his stunned expression and offered a faint smile, as if sensing his disbelief. "I know it's hard to understand," she said softly. "I didn't expect to end up on Earth, but it was my only choice." Ryan tried to absorb everything she was saying. "Earth?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. You're from another planet." Celine nodded, her expression a mix of sadness and determination. "I am, but Earth, it's a safe place for now. The Xilarians can't track me here. Not yet." Ryan blinked, still trying to come to grips with what he was hearing. "So, you're saying you're an alien princess?" "Correct," Celine replied, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "And you, Ryan, have made a decision that will change both of our lives forever." Ryan could only stare at her, his mind racing. This was insane. His life, his ordinary existence, had just been turned upside down. And yet, despite everything, he couldn't bring himself to regret helping her. Ryan spent the next few days trying to wrap his mind around everything that had happened. Every time he looked at Princess Celine, he was reminded that his quiet, ordinary life was now something far more complicated. The beautiful woman with the violet eyes, the glowing skin, and the strange story of another world was now living in his apartment, and it felt like his whole world had shifted. There was still so much he didn't understand. But one thing was clear. Celine was not just running from enemies. She was hiding from a ruthless force that wouldn't stop until it found her. Though she had recovered from her injuries, Celine was constantly on edge. She wasn't comfortable being in one place for too long, and Ryan could tell she was always listening for something in the distance. She would pace back and forth in his small living room, glancing out the window nervously, her eyes searching the street. It made Ryan uneasy. He couldn't help but feel that they were being watched, though no one had ever approached them. "I can't stay here forever, Ryan," Celine would often say. "I need to keep moving, stay hidden. The Xilarians are relentless. If they find me here, they'll destroy everything." Ryan, though he had no experience in running from alien enemies, felt a deep need to protect her. He found himself thinking about her safety all the time. Who were the Xilarians? Why did they want her so badly? But every time he asked, Celine would look away, her face filled with sorrow, and refused to give him a straight answer. It wasn't just that she was a princess. Something else about her, something deeper, seemed to weigh heavily on her. One evening, as Ryan sat down to have dinner, Celine suddenly froze. Her hand went to her ear, as if listening to something only she could hear. Ryan looked at her in confusion, but before he could ask, she stood up quickly, her eyes wide with alarm. "They found us," she whispered, her voice shaking slightly. Ryan's stomach dropped. "What? Who?" he asked, standing up immediately, the calm evening suddenly feeling like it was spiraling into chaos. The Xilarians. They've located my energy signature. They know where I am, she said quickly, her voice steady, but her eyes betraying her fear. Ryan didn't waste a second. He grabbed his phone, ready to call for help. But Celine stopped him, her hand firm on his wrist. No time for that. If you try to call anyone, they'll know immediately. She ran to the window, peering through the blinds, her gaze sharp as ever. They'll be here any minute. Ryan felt a knot in his stomach. He had no plan, no idea how to fight off alien warriors or escape a planet-wide pursuit. But one thing was clear. He couldn't just let her be taken. Not now. Not after everything they had shared. What do we do? Ryan asked, his mind racing. His life had just gone from mundane to unimaginable, but he couldn't back out now. Not when she needed him. Celine looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. We run, she said quietly. I don't have the power to fight them, but I can hide. You have to trust me. We have to leave before they arrive. Ryan nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. They were going to face this danger together, but he didn't know where they would go. All he knew was that for the first time, he wasn't thinking about his own safety. He was thinking about Celine's, and that was all that mattered now. As they moved quickly to pack whatever they could carry, Ryan couldn't help but wonder just how far he was willing to go to protect this alien princess who had come into his life and turned everything upside down. But there was no time for hesitation. The Xilarians were close, and the chase had already begun. The sound of footsteps grew louder, the familiar hum of engines almost too close for comfort. Ryan's mind raced as he looked at Celine, her face pale with worry. The weight of the situation pressed down on him. The Xilarians were getting closer, and they had no time left. He felt a surge of fear, but it was quickly replaced by determination. He wasn't going to let her down, not when she needed him the most. We have to go, Celine whispered, her voice low but urgent. She grabbed his arm, leading him toward the door. Ryan nodded, his heart hammering in his chest, but as they reached for the handle, a sudden sound made him freeze in place. The door creaked open slightly. Ryan's breath caught in his throat, ready to face whatever enemy might be on the other side. But to his surprise, a tall figure stepped into the room. A man dressed in dark, military-style clothing, but his movements were calm and measured. Ryan instinctively stepped in front of Celine, but the stranger raised a hand in a gesture that seemed both familiar and soothing. I mean you no harm, the man said, his voice firm but not threatening. I'm Commander Alaric, sent to help you. Ryan squinted at the newcomer, confused. He hadn't heard of any Commander Alaric, and the way this man carried himself was unsettling. The faint glow of his eyes, the strange sense of power in his presence. It was clear this was no ordinary human. His gaze flickered to Celine, a look of recognition in his eyes. For a brief moment, there was an exchange between them, silent but full of meaning. Ryan felt his stomach tighten. What was going on? Who are you, and how do you know her? Ryan asked, his voice barely masking his distrust. Alaric turned his attention back to Ryan, his expression still calm. I am from Aurelia, and I've been following Princess Celine since her escape from Therion. The Xilarians have been tracking her, and I've been tasked with ensuring her safety. His words were straightforward, but Ryan could hear the urgency in his tone. The Xilarians are not far behind. We need to move. Now. Ryan stood frozen for a moment, trying to process the information. Aurelia, Therion. He had no idea what those names meant. All he knew was that he couldn't just let Celine be taken by the same forces that had already hurt her. Looking at her, he saw something he hadn't noticed before. She was not just a frightened woman in need of help. She was someone powerful, someone who was carrying the weight of her world on her shoulders. And she had trusted him to keep her safe. Celine stepped forward, her eyes meeting Ryan's. Alaric is someone I trust. He's helped me before. She paused, her voice filled with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "We don't have much time." Ryan glanced between them. For a moment, he felt completely out of his depth. He was just a regular guy, a student, and now he was being thrust into a situation that seemed straight out of a sci-fi novel. But there was no turning back. He didn't know how he would protect her, but he was going to try. For her. "Let's go," Ryan said, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside him. With Alaric leading the way, they quickly exited the apartment. As they moved down the corridor, Ryan glanced over his shoulder at the empty hall. The Solarians were still coming, but with the help of an unexpected ally, Ryan realized they just might have a chance to survive. The chase was on, and now he was more determined than ever to keep Celine safe. Ryan followed Commander Alaric and Celine through the dark alleyways, trying to stay as silent as possible. His heart was racing, and every sound felt like it was amplified. The crack of a twig, the distant hum of a car engine, even the soft breeze that passed through the night air. He wasn't sure how much time they had, but he knew that every second counted. The Solarians weren't far behind, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were closing in on them. Alaric led them to an old warehouse near the outskirts of the city, its walls weathered and worn down from years of neglect. There was a hidden entrance at the back, tucked away behind a stack of old crates and barrels. Alaric motioned for them to hurry inside. "We'll lay low here for a while," he whispered, his voice calm but urgent. "The Solarians have tracking technology that can pinpoint our location, but we might have a chance to lose them here." Ryan's mind was still spinning. Aurelia, Therian, Solarians, none of this made sense. He was just a normal guy who had walked into a park one evening and ended up caught in the middle of an intergalactic chase. But looking at Celine, he knew there was no going back. She had trusted him, and he couldn't abandon her now. Once inside, they moved quickly to the far corner of the warehouse, where Alaric began to scan the area. His fingers moved swiftly over a small device in his hand, and Ryan watched as the light on the device blinked in various colors. "We'll need to act fast," Alaric said, his voice low but filled with determination. "There's a secret transport hidden nearby. It will take us out of the city, but we'll need to be ready to move the moment it arrives." Ryan nodded, trying to steady his breathing. The warehouse was eerily quiet, save for the occasional metallic creak of the building settling. He glanced at Celine, who was standing by one of the windows, her eyes scanning the darkened street outside. She looked calm, but Ryan could tell that she was as tense as he was. Her past, her responsibilities, everything she had been running from. He could see it in her eyes. "I know this is difficult," Celine said quietly, turning toward Ryan. "But we're close to safety. You've done so much already, and I can't thank you enough. I just need you to stay strong for a little longer." Ryan didn't say anything at first. His mind was still whirling with questions. Why was she running? What had she left behind? But all of that could wait. Right now, they had to focus on the immediate threat. He could see the vulnerability in her, despite her strength. She had been running for her life for far too long, and now that she was here, on Earth, he could feel the weight of her burdens pressing down on her. "Don't worry," Ryan said, his voice more confident than he felt. "We'll get through this. We're in this together." As if on cue, a faint buzzing sound filled the air. Alaric's device beeped rapidly, and he looked up, his face serious. "The transport is ready. We move now." Without another word, they rushed toward the back of the warehouse, where a small, sleek vehicle was waiting. Ryan could feel the adrenaline pumping through his veins as they climbed into the transport. They had no time to waste. The Solarians were getting closer, and this was their chance to escape. As the transport lifted off the ground and shot into the night sky, Ryan glanced at Celine, who was looking out the window. For a moment, he caught her eye, and in that brief exchange, he knew that the journey ahead would be dangerous. But together, they would face whatever came next. As the transport zipped through the night sky, Ryan couldn't shake the uneasy feeling settling in his stomach. The momentary relief they had felt when they managed to escape the Solarians' pursuit had quickly been replaced by tension. The further they traveled, the more Ryan realized that escaping Earth was just the first step of a much larger, far more dangerous journey. He glanced over at Celine, who was staring out the window with an unreadable expression, her violet eyes fixed on the stars that stretched out before them. "Are you okay?" Ryan asked, trying to keep his voice steady. He had grown used to seeing Celine as strong and confident, but now, with the weight of her entire world on her shoulders, he saw the cracks in her composure. She had been running for so long, and Ryan could sense the exhaustion she carried beneath the surface. Celine turned to look at him, her face softening for a moment. "I will be," she replied, though there was an unmistakable sadness in her voice. "I've been on the run for so long, Ryan. I don't know what it's like to have a home anymore, to be free. I thought coming here to Earth would be the end of it, that I could hide. But now, everything's changing again." Ryan could hear the weight of her words, and for the first time, he realized just how much she had sacrificed. She wasn't just running from the Solarians. She was running from her past, from her role as a princess, from everything she had known. Earth had become a place of refuge, but it was never meant to be her permanent home. And now, Ryan was more involved than he had ever intended to be, pulled into a galactic struggle that was far beyond his understanding. Yet the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he couldn't turn his back on her. Not now. Not when he had promised to help her. "I don't know how this will end," Ryan said, his voice quiet but determined. "But I do know this: I'm not going anywhere. We'll figure this out together. I'm with you, no matter what comes next." Celine looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing his words. Her lips parted, and for the first time since they had met, she seemed genuinely moved. "I don't deserve your help," she whispered, her voice filled with regret. "You're a human. You've got your own life, your own future. Why would you risk everything for someone like me?" Ryan shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Because you're not just someone like you. You're someone I care about now. And you're not alone anymore." Celine's eyes softened, her hand reaching out to touch his in a moment of connection. She didn't speak, but the gratitude in her gaze was enough. In that simple touch, Ryan felt something stir deep within him, a sense of purpose that had been missing from his life until now. He wasn't sure what lay ahead or how they would navigate the dangerous path before them, but one thing was certain: he would protect Celine, no matter the cost. The transport began to hum softly as it shifted course, taking them further from Earth. Ryan looked out the window, the stars stretching endlessly before them. The universe felt so vast, so unfamiliar, and yet, for the first time, he didn't feel so small. Together with Celine and the unknown challenges ahead, he felt a sense of unity and resolve that he had never experienced before. Whatever came next, he would face it with her, and he was ready to fight for her freedom, no matter where the journey took them. As the transport continued its journey through the stars, Ryan couldn't help but feel the growing weight of everything that was happening. The closer they got to Aurelia, Celine's home planet, the more he realized how much was at stake. This was no longer just a battle to protect her from the Solarians. It was a battle for the future of her people, for her world, and for the future they could build together. But none of that seemed certain. Celine had told him little about her world, only that Aurelia had been a peaceful planet until the Solarians had arrived, intent on conquering it. She had flowed in secret, leaving behind a kingdom that had once thrived. Ryan didn't know the details, but he knew one thing for sure: Celine was no ordinary princess. The strength and wisdom she had shown in the time they had spent together told him that she wasn't just going to give up without a fight. And neither would he. The tension in the ship was palpable as they neared the planet's atmosphere. Alaric, who had been a quiet presence by their side, now spoke up. "We're entering the final stage of our journey," he said, his voice serious. "When we land, we will have no time to waste. The Exolarians will be close, and we must act quickly to ensure that Aurelia's forces are prepared to fight back." Ryan nodded, his grip tightening around the armrest. He wasn't sure what he had signed up for, but he knew it was bigger than him. He was scared, but the fear was outweighed by his determination to help Selene, to help her reclaim her planet. They were about to face an enemy that had the power to crush entire civilizations, but Ryan wasn't backing down. He had seen Selene's resilience, and he had seen the strength of the people who stood by her. They weren't going to lose this fight. As the transport descended toward Aurelia, Ryan's thoughts turned to the world they were about to land on. He had only seen it from a distance, but the view from space was breathtaking. Aurelia was a world of green plains, majestic mountains, and shimmering oceans. From the stars, it seemed peaceful, almost too peaceful, but Ryan knew better now. Peace was something worth fighting for. When they landed, it was in the heart of the planet's capital. Aurelia's buildings gleamed in the light of its twin suns, but Ryan could see the signs of struggle. The once thriving city now had an air of quiet desperation, with soldiers standing guard on every corner. The Accelarians had been here too long, and the people of Aurelia had been fighting a losing battle for months. Selene's face hardened as they exited the transport. She was a princess, yes, but she had the heart of a warrior. "This is where it ends," she whispered, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "We fight for my people. We fight for Aurelia." Ryan's chest tightened as he stood beside her, feeling the weight of her words. This wasn't just her fight anymore. This was their fight. They had become a team, and Ryan knew that no matter what happened next, he would stand by her side. The battle for Aurelia had begun, and Ryan was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The sky over Aurelia was painted in shades of orange and pink as Ryan and Selene stood on the edge of the battlefield. The air was thick with tension, but there was an undeniable sense of determination in the people around them. Aurelia's forces, led by General Kalen, had assembled for the final stand against the Accelarians. Ryan, once an ordinary university student, now found himself standing among soldiers, commanders, and warriors, people who had been fighting for their home for far too long. His heart pounded in his chest, and the weight of the moment hit him harder than ever. This was no longer just about protecting Selene. This was a fight for the future of an entire world, a world that he had come to care for deeply, even though it had only been a few short days since he had arrived. Selene stood beside him, her face hard with resolve. She had transformed from the scared princess hiding from enemies to a true leader, someone ready to take back what was hers. Her strength had always been there, but now, in the face of the greatest challenge of her life, it was shining through in every step she took. As they surveyed the battlefield, Ryan couldn't help but admire her courage. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was the heart of this fight. "Are you ready for this?" Ryan asked, his voice steady but filled with emotion. He wasn't sure if he was asking her or himself. He had no military experience, no battle tactics under his belt, but he knew that he had to give everything he had in this moment. Selene glanced at him, her violet eyes softening for a moment. "We have no choice, Ryan. I've been running for so long, hiding and fighting when I could. But now, it's time to take back my home. Time to end this." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that Ryan could feel deep in his bones. She wasn't just talking about a battle. She was talking about reclaiming her world, her people, and her future. And somehow, against all odds, Ryan had become part of that future. The Accelarians were advancing, their fleet of ships visible in the distance, darkening the sky with their ominous presence. Ryan could feel the ground vibrating beneath him as the Aurelians prepared for the onslaught. The battle had begun. But even with the odds stacked against them, there was something in the air that Ryan couldn't explain, a feeling of hope. He wasn't alone anymore. He wasn't just a student running from something he didn't understand. He was part of something much bigger now. With a nod, Selene turned to face the gathered soldiers. "For Aurelia," she called out, her voice ringing out with authority. Her people responded with a roar of approval, their voices echoing across the battlefield. The ground seemed to shake with the power of their collective will. They were fighting not just for survival, but for freedom, for peace, and for the future. Ryan joined them, his heart racing, his mind clear. He wasn't sure how this would end. But standing by Celine's side, fighting for a world that had welcomed him with open arms, he knew that this was where he belonged. The battle for Aurelia was just beginning, but for the first time in his life, Ryan was ready to face whatever came next. Together, they would fight. And together, they would win. The battle for Aurelia raged on for hours, the ground shaking beneath their feet as explosions lit up the horizon. Ryan found himself moving alongside the soldiers, adrenaline coursing through his veins. It wasn't like anything he had ever experienced. The chaos of the battlefield, the roar of distant artillery, the sound of clashing forces, it all felt surreal. And yet here he was, fighting side by side with Celine and the people of Aurelia. Celine was at the front lines, her presence commanding. She had changed in the time since they had first met. Gone was the frightened princess who had hidden from her enemies. Now she was a true leader, guiding her people with confidence and determination. Her every move was calculated, her voice steady as she commanded her forces. Ryan watched in awe as she coordinated the defenses, her eyes locked on the enemy movements. She wasn't just fighting for her kingdom, she was fighting for everything she had ever known. And now, Ryan was fighting right beside her, his thoughts focused solely on her safety and the success of their mission. "Keep moving," Celine shouted, her voice cutting through the noise. "We can't let them breach the outer defenses." Ryan nodded and pushed forward, his focus clear. He wasn't a soldier, but with every step, he felt more like one. The training the Aurelians had given him was paying off, and he was beginning to understand the tactics and strategies that would give them the upper hand. Every move was critical. Every decision could mean the difference between victory and defeat. The Xelarians were relentless, but their numbers were starting to dwindle. The Aurelians had put up a stronger resistance than the enemy had anticipated, and Ryan could see the fear starting to spread among the Xelarian ranks. For the first time since the battle began, the Xelarians were retreating. Ryan felt a surge of hope. Could they actually win this? As the battle continued, Ryan and Celine found themselves side by side, both standing firm as the forces clashed around them. Celine's gaze met his, her expression softening despite the chaos surrounding them. For a brief moment, everything slowed down, and it was just the two of them. The weight of their shared journey, the struggles they had faced, and the bond they had formed became more apparent than ever. Ryan's heart raced as he saw Celine's resolve. She had never once hesitated, not when things were at their darkest, not when the future seemed uncertain. He knew then that no matter what happened, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be, they would face it together. With one final push, the Aurelians managed to break through the Xelarian forces. The remaining enemy ships began to retreat, their commanders realizing they had lost. The battlefield was silent for a moment, and then a cheer went up from the Aurelians. Victory was theirs. Ryan stood beside Celine, their hands meeting in a quiet moment of shared triumph. "We did it," Ryan said, his voice filled with awe. Celine's smile was brighter than the twin suns rising over Aurelia. "No, we did it together," she replied. Aurelia was free. The battle had been won, but Ryan knew that this was only the beginning of a new era for both Aurelia and himself. As Celine's people celebrated their victory, Ryan realized that he had found something more than just adventure. He had found family, and a future worth fighting for. Together, they would rebuild, and together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead.